Chapter 2. The Bible's Fight to Live. There are many strands of evidence providing that the Bible really is God's Word. Each strand is strong, but when all are taken together, they are unbreakable. In this chapter and the one following, we will discuss just one strand of evidence, the history of the Bible as a book. The truth is, it is nothing short of a miracle that this remarkable book has survived until today. Consider the facts for yourself. Paragraph 1. The Bible is more than just a book. It is a rich library of 66 books, some short and some quite long, containing law, prophecy, history, poetry, counsel, and much more. Centuries before the birth of Christ, the first 39 of these books were written mostly in the Hebrew language by faithful Jews or Israelites. This part is often called the Old Testament. The last 27 books were written in Greek by Christians and are widely known as the New Testament. According to the internal evidence and the most ancient traditions, these 66 books were written over a period of about 1,600 years, beginning when Egypt was a dominant power and ending when Rome was mistress of the world. Chapter 2. Only the Bible survived. More than 3,000 years ago, when the writing of the Bible got started, Israel was just one small nation among many in the Middle East. Jehovah was their God, while the surrounding nations had a bewildering variety of gods and goddesses. During that period of time, the Israelites were not the only ones to produce religious literature. Other nations too produced written books that reflected their religion and their national values. For example, the Akkadian legend of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia and the Smara epics, written in Ugaritic, a language spoken in what is now northern Syria, were doubtless very popular. The vast literature of that era also included works such as the admonitions of Ippur and the prophecy of Neferuhu in the Egyptian language, hymns to different divinities in Sumerian, and prophetic works in Akkadian. Paragraph 3. All these Middle Eastern works, however, met a common fate. They were forgotten, and even the languages that were written in became extinct. It was only in recent years that archaeologists and philologists learned of their existence and discovered how to read them. On the other hand, the first written books of the Hebrew Bible were survived right up to our time and are still widely read. Sometimes scholars claim that the Hebrew books in the Bible were derived in some way from those ancient literary works, but the fact that so much of that literature was forgotten while the Hebrew Bible survived marks the Bible as significantly different. Paragraph 4. The Guardian of the Word. Make no mistake, from a human standpoint, the survival of the Bible was not a foregone conclusion. The communities that produced it suffered such difficult trials and bitter oppression that its survival to our day is truly remarkable. In the years before Christ, the Jews who produced the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, were a relatively small nation. They dwelt precariously amid powerful political states that were jostling with one another for supremacy. Israel had to fight for its life against a succession of nations, such as the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites, during a period when the Hebrews were divided into two kingdoms. The cruel Assyrian Empire virtually wiped out the northern kingdom, while the Babylonians destroyed the southern kingdom, taking the people into an exile for which only a remnant returned 70 years later. Paragraph 5. There are even reports of attempted genocide against the Israelites. Back in the days of Moses, Pharaoh ordered the murder of all their newborn baby boys. If his order had been observed, the Hebrew people would have been annihilated. Exodus 1:15 through 22. Much later, when the Jews came under Persian rule, their enemies plotted to get a law passed extended to exterminate them. Esther 3:1 through 15. The failure of this scheme is still celebrated in the Jewish festival of Purim. Paragraph 6. Later still, when the Jews were subject to Syrian King Antiochus the fifth, fourth, tried very hard to Hellenize the nation, forcing it to follow Greek customs and worship Greek gods. He too failed. Instead of being wiped out or assimilated, the Jews survived, while one after the other, most of the national groups around them disappeared from the world scene, and the Hebrew scriptures of the Bible survived with them. Paragraph 7. The Christians, who produced the second part of the Bible, the New Testament, were also an oppressed group. Their leader, Jesus, was killed like a common criminal. In the early days after his death, Jewish authorities in Palestine tried to suppress them. When Christianity spread to other lands, the Jews hounded them, trying to hinder their missionary work. Acts 5:27-28, Acts 7:58 through 60, Acts 11:19 through 21, Acts 13:45, chapter 14:19, chapter 18:5 and 6. Paragraph 8. In the time of Nero, the initial tolerant attitude of the Roman authorities changed. Tacitus boasted of the exquisite tortures inflicting on Christians by that vicious emperor, and from his time on, being a Christian was a capital offense. In 303 CE, Emperor Diocletian acted directly against the Bible. In an effort to stamp out Christianity, he ordered that all Christian Bibles should be burned. Paragraph 9. These campaigns of oppression and genocide were a real threat to the Bible's survival. If the Jews had gone the way of the Philistines and the Moabites, or if the efforts of the first Jewish and the then Roman authorities to stamp out Christianity had succeeded, who would have written and preserved the Bible? Happily, the guardians of the Bible, first the Jews and then the Christians, were not wiped out, and the Bible survived. There was, however, another serious threat, if not to the survival, at least to the integrity of the Bible. Paragraph 10. Fallible copies. Many of the aforementioned ancient works that were subsequently forgotten had been engraved in stone or stamped on durable clay tablets. Not so the Bible. This was originally written on papyrus or on parchment, much more perishable materials. Thus, the manuscripts produced by the original writers disappeared long ago. How then was the Bible preserved? Countless thousands of copies were laboriously written out by hand. This was the normal way to reproduce a book before the advent of printing. Paragraph 11. There is, however, a danger in copying by hand. Sir Kendrick Kenyon, the famous archaeologist and librarian of the British Museum, explained, "The human hand and the brain have not yet been created, which could copy the whole of a long work absolutely, without error. Mistakes were certain to creep in. When a mistake crept into a manuscript, it was repeated when that manuscript became the basis for future copies. When many copies were made over a long period of time, numerous human errors crept in." Paragraph 12. In view of the many thousands of copies of the Bible that were made, how do we know that this reproduction process did not change it beyond all recognition? Well, take the case of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. In the second half of the 6th century BCE, when the Jews returned from their Babylonian exile, a group of Hebrew scholars known as Sopharim, scribes, became the custodians of the Hebrew Bible text, and it was their responsibility to copy those scriptures for use in public and private worship. They were highly motivated, professional men, and their work was of the highest quality. Paragraph 13. From the 7th century to the 10th century of our common era, the heirs of the Sopharim were the Masoretes. Their name comes from the Hebrew word meaning tradition, and essentially they too were scribes charged with the task of preserving the traditional Hebrew texts. The Masoretes were meticulous. For example, the scribe had to use a properly authenticated copy as his master text, and he was not allowed to write anything from memory. He had to check each letter before writing it. Professor Norman K. Gottwald reports, "Something of the care with which they discharged their duties is indicated in the rabbinic requirement that all new manuscripts were to be proofread and defective copies discarded at once." Paragraph 14. How accurate was the transmission of the text by the Sopharim and the Masoretes? Until 1947, it was difficult to answer that question, since the earliest available complete Hebrew manuscripts were from the 10th century of our Common Era. In 1947, however, some very ancient manuscript fragments were found in caves in the vicinity of the Dead Sea, including parts of books of the Hebrew Bible. A number of fragments dated to before the time of Christ. Scholars compared these with existing Hebrew manuscripts to confirm the accuracy of the transmission of the text. What was the result of this comparison? Paragraph 15. One of the oldest works discovered was the complete book of Isaiah, and the closeness of its text to that of the Masoretic Bible we have today is amazing. Professor Millar Burrows writes, many of the differences between the recently discovered St. Mark Isaiah scroll and the Masoretic text can be explained as mistakes in copying. Apart from these, there is a remarkable agreement on the whole with the text found in the medieval manuscripts. Such agreement in the manuscript, so much older, gives reassuring testimony to the general accuracy of the traditional text. Burroughs adds, it is a matter for wonder that through something like 1,000 years the text underwent so little alteration. Paragraph 16. In the case of the part of the Bible written in Greek by Christians, the so-called New Testament, the copyists were more like gifted amateurs than like the highly trained professional sophron. But working as they did under the threat of punishment by the authorities, they took to their work seriously. And two things assure us that we today have a text essentially the same as that penned by the original writers. First, we have manuscripts dated much closer to the time of writing that is in the case with the Hebrew part of the Bible. Indeed, one fragment of the Gospel of John is from the first half of the 2nd century, less than 50 years from the date when John probably wrote his Gospel. Second, the sheer number of manuscripts that have survived provides a formidable demonstration of the soundness of the text. Paragraph 17. On this point, Sir Frederick Kenyon testified, it cannot be too strongly asserted that in substance the text of the Bible is certain. Especially is this the case with the New Testament. The number of manuscripts of the New Testament, of early translations from it, and of quotations from it in the oldest writings of the Church, is so large that it is practically certain that the true reading of every doubtful passage is preserved in some one or other of these ancient authorities. This can be said of no other ancient book in the world. Paragraph 18. The people and their language. The original languages in which the Bible was written were also, in the long run, an obstacle to its survival. The first 39 books were mostly written in Hebrew, the tongue of the Israelites, but Hebrew has never been widely known. If the Bible had stayed in that language, it would never have had any influence beyond the Jewish nation and the few foreigners who could read it. However, in the 3rd century BCE, for the benefit of the Hebrews living in Alexandria, Egypt, translation of the Hebrew part of the Bible in the Greek began. Greek was then an international language. Thus, the Hebrew Bible became easily accessible to non-Jews. Paragraph 19. When the time came for the second part of the Bible to be written, Greek was still very widely spoken, so the final 27 books of the Bible were written in that tongue, but not everybody could understand Greek. Hence, translations of both the Hebrew and the Greek parts of the Bible soon began to appear in the everyday languages of those early centuries, such as Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, Georgian, Gothic, and Ethiopic. The official language of the Roman Empire was Latin, and Latin translations were made in such numbers that an authorized version had to be commissioned. This was completed about 405 CE and came to be known as the Vulgate, meaning popular or common. Paragraph 20. Thus, it was in spite of many obstacles that the Bible survived down to the early centuries of our common era. Those who produced it were despised and persecuted minorities living a difficult existence in a hostile world. It could easily have been badly distorted in the process of copying, but it was not. Moreover, it escaped the danger of being available only to people who spoke certain languages. Paragraph 21. Why was it so difficult for the Bible to survive? The Bible itself says, "The whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one." 1 John 5:19. In view of this, we would expect the world to be hostile to published truth, and this has proved to be the case. Why then did the Bible survive when so many other pieces of literature that did not face the same difficulties were forgotten? The Bible answers this too. It says, "The sayings of Jehovah endures forever." 1 Peter 1:25. If the Bible really is the Word of God, no human power can destroy it. And right up into this 20th century, this has been true. Paragraph 20. However, in the 4th century of our common era, something happened that eventually resulted in new attacks on the Bible and profoundly affected the course of European history. Just 10 years after Diocletian tried to destroy all copies of the Bible, imperial policy changed the Christianity and policy changed and Christianity was legalized. 12 years later, in 325 CE, a Roman emperor presided over the Christian Council of Nicaea. Why would such a seemingly favorable development prove to be hazardous for the Bible? We will see the answer in the following chapter.